I have a very broad definition of infrastructure that I think is shaped by those early experiences of it's all the things that let you lead a good life, that enable well-being, and that's physical, that's social, that's economic, and all the other stuff is a means to an end, right? Nobody needs a road or a railway. They need to be able to get to work or school safely, right? You need clean water, not a pipe. And so really getting down to what are the ends, not the means, and then how do you meet those ends is what I do today.
In what you're saying, I think, is also the idea of focusing on impact, on a set of outcomes that we can all agree upon, rather than the outputs, rather than the activities that we need to conduct to get there.
The through line in my whole career has been, how do you make sure you get to those outcomes well? How do you ask the question differently? Not how do you build this one type of thing. I really do enjoy the problem solving and finding interesting questions and coming at them from a lot of different angles. So that early community mapping work turned into work with the World Bank in Lesotho in southern Africa with one of my professors at the time on the study abroad. For your listeners who may not know, this is a tiny landlocked country inside of South Africa, and it is very mountainous. It's one of the places where it often gets so cold that it can snow. It is absolutely gorgeous and wildly inaccessible, and we were trying to figure out how to think about mobility and access separate from building roads. Why weren't people, for example, going to health clinics even though the road was there? So we ended up going to all these different villages and sitting down and doing these mapping interviews and just asking, where do you go every day? And there were two surprises for me. One was that as we asked these questions and as the maps unfolded, and you can start seeing this network emerge of the dense things you do daily, the things you do once a week, the things you do every month. And what we noticed after the first few conversations was that the women were adding different things to the map than the men. So we started separating out groups. And then we started seeing big differences in the women's and the men's maps. And the women's maps had these gaping holes. And we took and overlaid them on top of the transportation planning maps, the official planning maps, and we realized a lot of the big holes were right where the World Bank had cited health clinics. So it turned out that if you take a country map and you say, where's the population? Let's create these catchment areas. So we reach the most people with health services. And so a lot of what we revealed in these conversations was there were barriers. Women weren't seeking access to health care in places where they had to walk through shepherds' fields because there was a risk of assault. So our little team, these wonderful Basotho transportation planners who were very game, they were building GIS systems and we were forcing them back into villages with drawing on maps on the ground. And so they were extraordinarily gracious. And we were able to say, in addition to all these roads, add a set of footbridges for women's safety. And the footbridge had to be less wide than the width of a sheep, because that would protect the women from teenage shepherd boys who couldn't cross without their flocks. That was the engineering specification. And that's what infrastructure can look like. So loads of mistakes along the way, but I had this really interesting early set of opportunities to actually learn in the field from planners, but also other types of folks who are really deeply community connected.
You'd never think of it if you didn't actually speak with the people that have to use the bridge.
Think about what don't you want crossing the bridge. It's offense and defense, right, in these systems. And I think too often you get focused on the bridge, not the users of the bridge. Yeah. And so I've always tried to hold that in mind in everything I do is, what's it actually being used for? What else might it enable? And so in my work now, we still lead with the questions, right? It's still very much, who loses money if we don't do this right? Who suffers if it's not done right? And how do you bring those things together?